For over a decade, China celebrated a lead they thought was insurmountable. While Beijing paraded hypersonic missiles through Tiananmen Square, American programs stumbled through failed tests and budget cuts. State media declared victory, claiming the United States had fallen hopelessly behind in the race for the ultimate weapon. Chinese generals boasted that their DF-17 and DF-ZEF glide vehicles had rewritten the rules of warfare, rendering American defenses obsolete. The Pentagon, they said, was chasing ghosts while China sprinted ahead. Then in the shadows of the California desert and the hills of the Pacific Northwest, something changed. American engineers stopped chasing China's approach and built something entirely different. Not faster, not flashier, but more lethal in ways Beijing never anticipated. The Dark Eagle emerged not as an answer to China's hypersonics, but as a counter so devastating it made their decade of progress look like a detour. What did the United States build while China was busy celebrating? And why did the weapon system that seemed late to the party become the one that rewrote the entire strategic playbook? In October 2019, China unveiled the DF-17 during the 70th anniversary parade in Beijing. The missile rolled past the reviewing stand mounted on a transporter erector launcher, its distinctive wedge-shaped glide vehicle gleaming under television lights. This was not just hardware, it was a statement. The DF-17 represented a new class of weapon, one designed to fly too fast and too unpredictably for traditional missile defenses to intercept. Chinese engineers had cracked a problem that had vexed militaries for decades: how to deliver a warhead at hypersonic speeds while maintaining enough control to hit a precise target. The DF-17 works in two stages. A conventional ballistic missile launches the payload into the upper atmosphere, then releases a hypersonic glide vehicle that skims along the edge of space at speeds exceeding Mach 5. Unlike a ballistic missile that follows a predictable arc, the glide vehicle maneuvers, changing altitude and direction to evade tracking and interception. American radar operators watching these tests described it as trying to catch a falling knife that keeps changing direction. The weapon was designed for one purpose: to strike high-value targets like aircraft carriers, air bases, and command centers before defenses could react. China did not stop there. By 2021, reports surfaced of tests involving the DF-ZEF, an even more advanced glide vehicle capable of global reach. Intelligence assessments suggested the weapon could circle the Earth before striking, approaching targets from unexpected angles and altitudes. The implications were staggering. Missile defense systems are designed to watch specific corridors, predicting where threats will come from based on the attacker's location. A weapon that could come from any direction rendered those assumptions useless. Beijing's propaganda machine went into overdrive. State-run outlets published op-eds claiming the hypersonic advantage had shifted the balance of power permanently. One article in the Global Times declared that American carrier groups, the backbone of Pacific dominance, were now vulnerable relics. Chinese military scholars wrote papers arguing that hypersonic weapons had created a window of opportunity, a period where the United States could not respond in kind. The message to Washington was clear: the era of American military supremacy was over. Western analysts watched with alarm, congressional hearings filled with warnings about the hypersonic gap. Defense officials testified that China had conducted hundreds of hypersonic tests while the United States had managed only a handful. The numbers were damning. By 2020, China had performed over 20 times more hypersonic flight tests than the United States. Every failed American test made headlines, reinforcing the narrative that Beijing had pulled ahead in a race that mattered. But the story was more complicated than the headlines suggested. While China focused on speed and demonstration, American engineers were wrestling with a different problem: reliability. Hypersonic flight is brutally unforgiving. At Mach 5 and above, the air itself becomes a weapon. Temperatures on the leading edges of a glide vehicle can exceed 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel. The slightest imperfection in the thermal protection system means catastrophic failure. Guidance systems have to function in an environment where plasma sheets can block radio signals. Structural components must withstand forces that would tear apart a conventional aircraft. China's early tests achieved speed, but American intelligence assessments suggested many of those flights ended in failures that were never publicly acknowledged. A glide vehicle that breaks apart before reaching its target is not a weapon. It is an expensive firework. Beijing's advantage was not as solid as it appeared. They had proven the concept, but operationalizing it at scale remained an open question. Meanwhile, in the United States, a quieter effort was underway, one that prioritized not just achieving hypersonic flight, but building a weapon system that could be fielded, sustained, and deployed in numbers that mattered. Inside a sprawling Lockheed Martin facility in Huntsville, Alabama, a team of engineers gathered around a missile unlike anything the United States had fielded before. This was not a prototype or a technology demonstrator. It was the long-range hypersonic weapon, better known as Dark Eagle. The name was deliberate, chosen to evoke both predatory precision and the element of surprise. But unlike the flashy unveiling of Chinese systems, Dark Eagle was being built in relative silence, away from cameras and state media fanfare. The weapon system consists of two main components, a ground-launched booster and a common hypersonic glide body, or CHGB. The booster is a two-stage solid rocket motor designed to propel the glide body to the edge of space, reaching altitudes above 60 miles. At that height, the atmosphere thins to almost nothing, reducing drag and allowing the glide body to achieve velocities exceeding Mach 5. Once the booster burns out, the glide body separates and begins its descent, maneuvering through the atmosphere toward the target. What sets Dark Eagle apart is not just speed, but precision and flexibility. The common hypersonic glide body is designed to strike targets over 1,700 miles away, with accuracy measured in single-digit meters. That range puts targets deep inside contested territory within reach without ever crossing into heavily defended airspace. The glide body's flight path is not fixed. It can adjust course mid-flight, responding to updated targeting data or evading interception attempts. The weapon does not just fly fast, it thinks. Development was anything but smooth. Early tests at the Pacific Missile Range facility in Hawaii encountered setbacks. In 2021, a planned flight test was scrubbed due to a battery failure in ground support equipment. Critics seized on the delay as proof that the United States was still floundering, but the engineers kept working. They refined the thermal protection system, upgrading materials to withstand the searing heat of hypersonic re-entry. They improved the guidance algorithms, running thousands of simulations to ensure the glide body could maintain control even in the chaotic environment of the upper atmosphere. By March 2022, the system was ready for a live fire test. A CHGB was loaded onto a booster at the Pacific Spaceport Complex in Alaska. The target was over 1,000 miles away, a set of coordinates in the open Pacific. At the designated time, the missile roared to life, climbing vertically on a pillar of fire. The booster stages separated cleanly, and the glide body continued its arc into the stratosphere. For the next several minutes, the weapon was invisible to observers on the ground, streaking through the upper atmosphere at speeds approaching Mach 17 during the boost phase before settling into a hypersonic glide. When the glide body re-entered the lower atmosphere, it maneuvered toward the target, adjusting its trajectory with precision. The weapon struck within meters of the aim point, validating years of design work in a single flight. The test was not publicized with parades or press conferences. A brief Department of Defense statement confirmed success, and the program moved forward. That understated approach would become a pattern. While China celebrated each milestone, the United States focused on making the weapon work. What made Dark Eagle particularly dangerous was not any single feature, but the integration of capabilities. The weapon could be launched from mobile platforms, making it difficult to target preemptively. The transporter erector launchers based on proven Army systems could be moved to dispersed locations and set up within hours. Once launched, the missile's flight profile made interception nearly impossible with current technology. Radar systems designed to track ballistic missiles struggle with hypersonic glide vehicles that maneuver unpredictably. The weapon does not arc high into space like a traditional ICBM. It stays lower, complicating detection and shrinking the engagement window for defenses. The targeting system was another breakthrough. Dark Eagle's glide body receives guidance updates via a secure data link throughout its flight. That means even if the target moves or new intelligence becomes available, the weapon can adapt. In a conflict scenario, that flexibility is critical. A ship leaving port, a missile battery relocating, or a command post going mobile can all be engaged in real time. The weapon does not rely on pre-programmed coordinates locked in before launch, it hunts. American engineers also solved a problem that plagued earlier hypersonic designs, the plasma sheath. At hypersonic speeds, the air around the glide body ionizes, creating a layer of superheated plasma that blocks radio signals. For years, that phenomenon made it nearly impossible to communicate with a hypersonic vehicle in flight. Lockheed Martin's team developed a solution involving antenna placement and frequency selection that allows data to pass through the plasma layer. The details are classified, but the result is clear. Dark Eagle can receive and process targeting updates even while traveling at Mach 5+. The first operational battery of Dark Eagle systems was delivered to the Army's 5th Battalion, 3rd Field Artillery Regiment in 2023. The unit, based at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State, began training on the system immediately. Crews practiced the setup procedures, learning to emplace the launchers, load the missiles, and conduct fire missions under realistic conditions. The goal was not just to field a weapon, but to integrate it into the broader joint force structure. Dark Eagle was designed to work alongside other systems, taking targeting cues from satellites, aircraft, and ground sensors. By late 2023, the Army declared initial operating capability, meaning the system was ready for combat deployment. The announcement was quiet, buried in budget documents and defense press releases, but the implications were loud. The United States now had a weapon that could strike targets across the breadth of the Pacific with speed and precision that no existing defense could reliably counter. The hypersonic gap that China had celebrated was closing fast, and the American response was not just catching up. It was leapfrogging ahead in the metrics that mattered: reliability, accuracy, and operational readiness. Dark Eagle's true advantage lies not in the technology alone, but in how it changes the strategic equation. For years, Chinese military planners operated under the assumption that their forces could mass near Taiwan or in the South China Sea with relative impunity. The distances were too great for conventional American strikes, and forward-deployed forces were too vulnerable to preemptive attack. That calculus depended on time and space. China believed it could act before the United States could respond effectively. Dark Eagle collapses that assumption. With a range exceeding 1,700 miles, the weapon can reach targets across the entire First Island chain and deep into mainland China from launch sites as far away as Guam, Japan, or even the continental United States. A missile battery positioned on Okinawa can hold at-risk targets in Shanghai, Qingdao, and Ningbo. A launcher in the Philippines can threaten ports, air bases, and command centers throughout southern China. The geography that once favored Beijing now works against it. The flight time is equally devastating. From launch to impact, Dark Eagle takes less than 15 minutes to cover maximum range. That is faster than any interceptor can scramble, faster than most air defense systems can reorient, and faster than commanders can react. In military parlance, this creates a compressed decision cycle. The target has minutes, not hours, to respond. For high-value assets like aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, or mobile missile launchers, that is not enough time to reposition or take evasive action. The weapon arrives before the warning is fully processed. China's vaunted air defense network, built over 2 decades at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars, was designed to counter aircraft and cruise missiles. Systems like the HQ-9 and S-400 can engage targets at ranges up to 150 miles, but those systems assume the threat is moving at subsonic or low supersonic speeds. A hypersonic glide vehicle traveling at Mach 5 or faster covers that distance in under 2 minutes. The engagement window shrinks to seconds. Radar operators have to detect, track, assign, and fire almost instantly. Human reaction times become a liability. Even if a defender manages to launch an interceptor, the physics are brutal. A missile traveling at Mach 3 trying to hit a target moving at Mach 5 is attempting an intercept geometry that offers almost no margin for error. The glide body can maneuver, forcing the interceptor to adjust its course mid-flight and burning energy it cannot spare. Most intercept attempts fail not because the defender lacks capability, but because the math does not work. The offense has the advantage of speed and initiative. Beijing's response has been predictable. Chinese military journals now publish articles on hypersonic defense, discussing layered systems and directed energy weapons. But those solutions are years away from deployment, and even then their effectiveness remains unproven. Directed energy weapons like high-powered lasers sound promising in theory. In practice, they require enormous amounts of power, clear weather, and a target that stays in the engagement envelope long enough for the beam to burn through. A hypersonic glide vehicle moving at 6,000 feet per second does not give lasers that luxury. The economic dimension amplifies the advantage. Each Dark Eagle missile costs approximately $40 million when accounting for development amortization. That sounds expensive until you compare it to what it can destroy. A Type 055 destroyer, China's most advanced surface combatant, costs over $900 million. An air base with hardened shelters, fuel depots, and command facilities represents billions in infrastructure. A single successful Dark Eagle strike can eliminate assets worth 10 times its cost. The exchange ratio favors the attacker overwhelmingly, and the United States is not building just one or two batteries. Production plans call for multiple battalions, each with 4 launchers capable of firing volleys in rapid succession. By 2027, the Army expects to field enough Dark Eagle systems to hold at risk hundreds of targets across the Pacific theater simultaneously. That kind of volume creates a targeting dilemma for defenders. Even if they could intercept some incoming glide bodies, they cannot intercept all of them. The sheer number of threats saturates defenses, ensuring that some weapons get through. The strategic impact extends beyond the immediate strike capability. Dark Eagle forces adversaries to disperse their forces, complicating logistics and command. A fleet that used to concentrate for mutual defense now has to spread out, reducing its effectiveness. Air bases that house dozens of aircraft now must scatter planes to remote strips, limiting sortie rates. Command centers that operated from known hardened facilities now have to go mobile, sacrificing communication bandwidth and situational awareness. The mere presence of Dark Eagle changes how the enemy operates, imposing costs even when the weapon is never fired. American allies have taken notice. Japan, Australia, and South Korea have all expressed interest in acquiring hypersonic strike capabilities, either through direct purchase or co-development programs. The goal is not just to bolster individual defenses, but to create a network deterrent across the region. If multiple countries can field weapons like Dark Eagle, the targeting problem for China becomes exponentially harder. Every potential launch site is another variable to account for, another threat axis to defend against. The psychological dimension is just as potent. For over a decade, Chinese military planning assumed a window of opportunity where hypersonic weapons gave them an edge the United States could not match. That window is closing. Dark Eagle's deployment signals that the advantage was temporary, and the United States has not just caught up but fielded a system that may be more operationally reliable. The shift in confidence is palpable. Where Chinese analysts once wrote with swagger about rewriting the rules of war, they now write with caution about the need for countermeasures and redundancy. One retired People's Liberation Army officer speaking at a 2024 defense forum in Beijing admitted the obvious. He said hypersonic weapons were supposed to be our asymmetric advantage, but the Americans turned it symmetric. Now we face the same threats we hope to impose on them. That candor is rare in Chinese military discourse, and it reveals the depth of the strategic recalibration underway. The real genius of Dark Eagle is not that it matches Chinese hypersonics, but that it exceeds them in the dimensions that matter most: reliability, precision, and integration. Speed alone does not win wars. The ability to hit the right target at the right time does. Dark Eagle delivers that capability in a package that can be fielded at scale, sustained in the field, and employed by troops who train with it every day. It is not a showpiece for parades, it is a weapon built to fight. As production ramps up and more batteries come online, the Pacific theater is being reshaped. What once looked like a Chinese advantage in standoff strike is now a contested domain where both sides can reach deep into the other's territory. But the United States holds a critical edge: the infrastructure to support sustained operations. American logistics networks built over decades can keep Dark Eagle batteries supplied, maintained, and ready to fire. That endurance combined with precision and range makes the weapon not just a tactical tool, but a strategic game changer. Right now, mobile launchers sit in hardened positions across the Pacific, each one loaded with a glide body that can cross 1,000 miles in minutes. The weapon China thought would never come has arrived, and it brought capabilities Beijing did not anticipate. The hypersonic race is not over, but the finish line has moved. Dark Eagle proved that innovation is not about being first, it is about being right. And in the calculus of modern conflict, being right means building weapons that work when it matters, that strike where it hurts, and that force the adversary to rethink every assumption they made. The Dark Eagle did not just answer China's hypersonics, it made them irrelevant. What do you think? Can China develop effective countermeasures, or has the strategic advantage shifted for good? Drop your thoughts below.